What's up, my ninjas? I'm Strident, and I am back with another video. This time I am talking about the G.I. Joe, potential G.I. Joe films, since once again, this is a franchise that Hollywood just can't get right. I know the formula for this. Somebody give me several $1,000,000 to do this sort of thing the right way. You know what I'm saying? Like, seriously. Or let's get a bunch of people together so we can do this right. Don't believe me? Let me explain. So today I check my email and I see I have a message from one of my ninjas, and he is in New Zealand. I was like, damn, people are listening to what I'm saying in New Zealand? That's dope. And we've got Joe fans all the way in New Zealand. That's freaking awesome. And somehow my little voice and what I have to say, someone wants to hear it all the way out there. And he was talking about Joe films, and if I think that they should make them in the more realistic, gritty style, like Christopher Nolan and blah, blah, blah. You know, that whole gritty, realistic style. And I started to answer, you know, kind of echoing what I said in my if I was in charge of the GI Joe brand video. And then I was like, you know what, I'm gonna make a video. And he actually mentioned that, you know, he'd be cool if I made a video. And I'm like, I guess you're gonna get your wish, because this is a good topic and it's something that I have to explain in detail, because just giving you a vague idea or answering it in a paragraph is not going to hit all the things that I want to say. You know what I'm saying? It's not going to hit all the areas that I want to hit. So, you know me, I can be long-winded, but I try to paint a picture to the fullest of my ability, and I think I can do that with it. I know I can do that with this. So, the big thing, oh, my ninja, by the way, David Tagilala, I think that is. Tagilala? I hope I'm saying that right. Tagilela? I hope I'm saying it right, homie. Forgive me if I messed it up. Usually if I hear it once, I can always repeat it the right way. But thank you for watching and listening and joining in the conversation, and being the catalyst for this video. I appreciate it. This is why I do this, and it's dope. I'm starting to feel this resurgence of inspiration to even play around with G.I. Joe stuff. So, yeah, bear with me. But, so, the issue with G.I. Joe as a film franchise is that the writers don't understand how to frame this Joe-verse, the on-screen Joe-verse. What do I mean by frame the on-screen Joe-verse? I mean that a lot of people think that G.I. Joe has to be put in a realistic context. And it doesn't, because it's not real life. Anyone who's ever read a G.I. Joe book, especially the early ones, forget the new stuff, because a lot of the new stuff is just as confused as the fans are. The old, original Larry Hama stuff, it was very much characters that at one point in time they existed in the same universe and world that we did. You know, you had Vietnam, you had, various conflicts that these guys took part in before joining the Joe team. Once they joined the Joe team, this is a universe within a universe that is no longer constricted by the rules of the regular world. What do I mean by this? They are constantly rescuing kidnapped scientists and presidents, and, you know, Cobra is taking over continents. You know what I'm saying? Like, slowly from the inside, they're taking over countries, building them up. They're doing things all over the place. I guess that's more of a recent happening, but in the older books, it was more these huge megalomaniac schemes, you know, or megalomaniacal schemes. And, you know, in our world, something like that just can't happen, even though there are conspiracies about some of this stuff. Pretty much these are the things that obviously were the basis for a lot of Larry Hama's ideas. So if you want to make a Joe film series that can work from any part of the universe, any part of the Joe-verse, you have to make a fictional version of the world that we live in. It can't be the modern world exactly as the modern world is. I mean, you can have it echo the modern world. You know, people use their freaking phones for everything. You know, we have iPads, we have high technology, Wikipedia, you know, shit is just, technology is just constantly evolving super fast. I get that. So you can do that. If you start with an OG13 film, though, you would have to have a portion of the film echo the real world as it was in the 80s or the late 70s. And then there's a part where now you go into the sci-fi as imagined back then, because it's the 80s, you know, 70s and 80s. The level of complexity and insanity that, I mean, situational insanity, you can do whatever the fuck you want to do. But the level of complexity of the designs and, you know, of what Cobra will be, because Cobra's always a couple years ahead of the curve when it comes to tech. You would have to show things with Cobra that fit that era. You would have to 100%. There's no ridiculously gross redesign. And when I say gross, I mean like huge, like a giant redesign of what a Cobra Hiss looks like. No, it needs to be a boxy, fast tank, like what the old Hiss was. You know what I'm saying? The Joes need to be using lower tech vehicles, with the exception of, you know, like the Ram Cycle, the freaking, I don't know, the Rolling Thunder didn't show up till the 90s, so you can't have that kind of shit. But do you get what I'm saying? You'd have to look at the line and then take the stuff that is actually accurate for that time period as far as the figure line goes. And if you have to make any type of, if you have to take any liberties and take something from another era that would fit, take something like an AC-130, you know what I'm saying? Or whatever the equivalent was back then. Take something like The Rock, which was essentially this big, it was the you know, rolling operations command center, but it was a big rig essentially with the base inside of it. Take something like that, because shit like that made sense when we talk sci-fi action, you know, or near future, or, you know what I'm saying, near future weaponry in the past, you know? So you can't go so ridiculously far. I mean, they have rocket packs, that's pushing it. They have laser guns, that's pushing it. You could even nix the laser guns if you want and just have regular guns, but the rocket packs need to stay, or jump packs as they were called. They would need to stay. OG13, this is what we were talking about when this question was posed to me. Now, designers in Hollywood, concept artists in Hollywood, you know, people working on big budget films have this tendency to over-design simple characters. Marvel does it, but somehow when they do it, it works because it still fits within the framework of the original designs. With the Joes, they're always bookended by whatever the era's military was, what it looked like, whatever the top of the line shit was for that era. So if they redesign the OG13, you would still have to keep them in line with what you see in front of you right now. They would need to look like what military gear looked like back then, with some embellishments so that you can separate them from standard modern military. So this would mean they could have the bulletproof vests that the new vests, the reactive impact armor that they had in Rise of Cobra, but it would have to be simplified. The design would have to be simple, kind of like what Zap and Grand Slam are wearing. You know what I'm saying? Like, it would still have to look like old gear, so you can tell it's old. None of this episode 1 bullshit where it's supposed to be back in the day, but it looks more advanced than right now or the future. You know what I'm saying? You can't do that. You have to simplify the look, but you have to amp up the action because things were harder, because the tech, even the high tech, was lower than what we have now. So it would be more in line with old school action films where, you know, people are taking out helicopters with motorcycles or with police cars or some shit like that. You know, a lot of physical action, a lot of situational action, you know, like Die Hard and shit, where it's not, we're going to rely on these fancy gadgets to do everything. No, the fancy gadget gets you to the, you know, the theater, as it were, gets you to the spot where the fight's going to take place, and then you fight, you know, because this is the old days. I think that it would be really cool for them to embrace the idea that I have with my Joe-verse, where there are code names that transcend, you know, the eras. And every era has a new version of a new recruit to take on the code name for each of these characters. Because if we're starting all the way back, you know, with, you know, 70s, and then we want to move through the eras, you couldn't possibly have all the Joes still be the same Joes, because some are going to die, some are going to get wounded, some of them are just going to get old. You know what I mean? Some of these guys drink heavily, some of them, you know, psychologically the job takes its toll, just like in real life. And those are the things that would be ties to the real world, so that people wouldn't feel like this is just too fantastical. When I say that you have to make a fictional version of the world, a fictional world that echoes our world, you can have a black president in the, you know, the 2000s era. You could have a female president in the 80s if you want to, but you can't have the exact same conflicts and have them happen exactly the same way. You know, you have to have them in a kind of like a parody of, you know what I mean? Or like maybe one or two of the conflicts are exactly the same, but other things are different. So when the world reacts to the things that might happen in this universe, the reactions will be understandable, and they can be more theatrical as opposed to being the real reaction. Because I mean, if G.I. Joe existed, 9/11 wouldn't have happened. You know what I'm saying? All this Iraq war shit wouldn't have happened. You know what I'm saying? Like, G.I. Joe would have stopped these things at the root, and we wouldn't have had to have all the tragedies that we've had. So we need to keep this away from the real world as much as possible. And that's the mistake they're making now, because by putting it in the real world, you have to make the Joes not nearly as good as they're supposed to be, because these fucked up things happened on their watch. You know what I'm saying? And this is something no one mentions. This is something even folks writing the books, they sometimes miss these things, and they try to put these amazing, fantastical situations in the real world, and a big chunk of it just couldn't happen based on the things that have happened in the real world, you know, based on organizations that exist in the real world. You would have all this conflict between the Joes and MI6, the Joes and the CIA, the Joes and, you know, the SEALs and various, you know, other organizations. You know what I'm saying? Joes and freaking GSG9 when they run through Germany, and you know what I'm saying? Like, there's all these organizations that you would have to tweak how they do what they do in this world to allow for the Joes to actually be able to do what they do. Now, how would the Joes look? You know, I mentioned that you would have to keep things pretty simple, keep them pretty much like what you see here, but you would have to update things. You know, you'd have to make things look a little bit more rough and tumble and not so just kind of boring. Because yes, some of these designs are kind of boring, even though they're classic and we love them so much. You would need to do some things. Now, I found 2 sets of customs of the original 13 that I like the general vibe. Some of the gear, it's wrong for the time, but this is the vibe that I think they need to go for if they're going to do this. I mean, obviously the way pants fit, the way some of the gear fits, the fact that certain types of knee pads and shoulder pads and elbow pads and, you know, helmets, they didn't have them back then. But like for the Joes, you could still use some newer stuff back then once they joined the Joe team, because the Joes are always ahead of the regular military as far as the gear they work with. But here's some of the looks that I like. So first up, we have the 25th anniversary versions of all these characters, you know, the OG13. And I dig them so much. They're so simple. This is the vibe that I want, only I would just change little things like make the armor a little fancier in some cases, you know, the boots a little bit fancier, the gloves a little bit fancier. But for the most part, this is the feel. Lots of green, you know, lots of olive drab, but things that we were familiar with from the cartoon and from these particular figures, they would be perfect. You just update them a little bit. Now I'm going to show you an update that works. This update, I found this on his tank. It was done by a guy named Solaris. I dig what he's doing here. He's simplifying these designs with lots of jackets, lots of jungle gear, lots of stuff that you've seen from the old days. You know what I mean? Stuff that's not too crazy. There's a couple characters who have gear that's a little bit modern, but I think he was going for a modern take on these characters. I would go in this direction, but keep it looking a little bit, you know, more old school. Mayhem Customs, they went and did a whole different take where they went modern 100%. They look like, you know, operators and, you know, just like current real world Joe. I shouldn't say real world, but almost more updated versions of the Joes. And I like it. I just would take this kind of direction because you see how much color is being used throughout these guys, and I would kind of add this to the 1970s, 80s kind of feel. You know, the haircuts need to be, you know, era accurate. The weapons need to be a little bit more accurate. You know, you won't have people running around with scars in 1970 something. You know what I'm saying? Because, you know, the scar doesn't look the same. You know, shit, I'm pretty sure it wasn't even there. They're just little things, you know, futuristic, you know, bazooka back in the 70s versus a futuristic bazooka now would be two different things. So you have to tweak things accordingly. But this is the feel that I think it should have, you know? So people don't get that there is a very distinct difference between a Joe and a regular soldier. They don't understand the idea that the Joes are superheroic versions of whatever their military distinction may be. Larry Hama was in the military. He knows what each person's, you know, specialty was and what all the distinctions are. And, you know, he researched the stuff he didn't know. And he used some of the stereotypes as well as the common characteristics of people who do those jobs, and he exaggerated the hell out of them and made them into essentially superheroes. They just happen to work in a military organization. That still has to come across. You know what I mean? Your hacker has to be amazing with, you know, his hacking skills, or your communications specialist has to understand how to use any kind of communications rig ever. You know, so Breaker has to just be the shit. People like what's his name? God, why is my brain slowing right now? People like rock and roll, you know, that surfer dude. He's so cool, plays the guitar, but he can destroy with a freaking hog. That's, you know, it's a stereotype. It's not something that's as common in reality as it was, you know, as it would seem if you grew up reading G.I. Joe. Characters like Clutch. Clutch has to be able to turn any vehicle into the General Lee as far as how he uses it. You know what I mean? You need to see him driving like it's Fast and Furious in the 70s and 80s. You know what I'm saying? You need to be able to see that with him. Snake Eyes, you need to channel the fucking kung fu craze, or channel Lone Wolf and Cub, since most people don't know the difference between Japanese films and Chinese films. Snake Eyes should not be doing kung fu, and what you've been seeing in all the films so far is Ray Park is he's a wushu specialist. Yeah, he knows some of the, he knows forms from different martial arts, both Chinese and Japanese, but you don't want to have him doing more of one and not the other that's more specific to what someone who was trained by a ninja clan should be doing. Ninjutsu is a martial art. It exists. You could research it, and then you could use that knowledge to have your character representing this Japanese martial art. So that's one of the things. And also, he's a commando. So what they should be doing is mix the techniques. You know, he obviously is a stealth op. Let him have the solid snake edge to him. And then when he fights, he could use standard CQC. But when the shit gets real, he could really go off and use ninjutsu. You know what I'm saying? Like, get Koichi Sakamoto to I don't know, or freaking Kane, or I'm sorry, Kane. I always say Kane. Kane or Sho Kosugi to choreograph the shit. You know what I'm saying? And go off that way. That's what he should be doing. The Arashikage should be fighting like straight up ninja assassin, like the movie Ninja Assassin. Um, and that's the only thing in the film that could feel a little bit futuristic as far as the approach, because martial arts, if it's done well, it looks the same across the ages. You know what I'm saying? Like ninjas always were agile and, you know, stealthy and tricky individuals to deal with. So, you know, when they're gymnastic, they you know, they're agile and they flip, they do all kinds of crazy gymnastical type things. You see that now. We saw that back in the 70s and the 60s. You could easily continue that. You know what I'm saying? And that would make sense. A lot of the more gun-focused characters, the more tactical soldier types, and I mean they're all soldiers, but there's a type. You know, he slugs people with. He doesn't get into kung fu stuff. You know, he'll choke you out or punch you, knock you out before he throws a jump spin kick or some shit. You know what I'm saying? He'll shoot you before he goes into a 3 or 4 minute fight. You know, martial arts fight. He won't do all that. He's just gonna beat you down the quick way. It's the American action hero stereotype. A lot of the Joes from the OG13 represent this. But what you have to do to make them transcend this, so you can see that there's a difference between them and all those other action heroes who were not Joes, is you have to give him a well-rounded base. If he's gonna fight, give him some, you know, fancy CQC stuff that would really work. Make him a little bit ahead of his time. Make him use some Aikido. Make him use some, you know, grapples that would really work in these situations. Add gunplay to the grapples, kind of like what Ronda Rousey was doing in Expendables 3. You know, do a lot of that stuff. Or like cover chaining. You see this a lot in John Woo films. Have them jumping from cover to cover in a fancy kind of way because they're not afraid of the gunfire. This is their job. This is what they do. This is what they excel at. So they're going to make it look as easy as possible. I mean, like I always say when people start talking about G.I. Joe and how it needs to be realistic and blah, 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 yakety schmackety, is that Hawk said it in the first fucking episode. So this should be ingrained in your memory. The Joe's job, he said, our job is to make miracles look easy. So we need crazy set piece or action set pieces and crazy, you know, stunts throughout. If you've seen any of Jackie Chan's old stuff, like the Police Story films, like, you know, Super Cop. I'm sorry, not Super Cop, because that is technically one of the Police Story films. What was the other one? Rumble in the Bronx, First Strike, Armor of Gods, Operation Condor, all that stuff. If you've seen those movies, then you know back in the day it still was possible to amp the action up to levels that we don't normally see in action films. That's what G.I. Joe needs to be. There also needs to be this sense of camaraderie amongst the team, because we don't really spend a lot of time with the Joe's families outside of the Joe team. I mean, every now and then you get to see Scarlett and her family. You tend to get to see Snake Eyes and his fellow Arashikage, but that's really it, you know. I mean, I know you've seen the Joe's families over the years, but what I'm saying is it's not like a sitcom where they go out and they do their job and then they go home. No, they're on call for long periods of time, and then when things are done, you can rotate the team. Cobra, your hero is only as good as his villain. Cobra needs to be amped up. They're thinking space age, while, you know, the Joes are thinking, you know, right here at home, right now, biggest gun to smash the enemy. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like Contra. They're really well trained, and like Prime used to say, he said G.I. Joe is well trained and under equipped in comparison to Cobra. Cobra is overly equipped and not as well trained. That's G.I. Joe in a nutshell. It's like playing Contra. The bad soldiers can get shot once and they stand in the way of the bullets. They're that stupid, but they're overconfident in their tech. That's why they fail. That's Cobra. Cobra uses really high tech. They have really, really ridiculous schemes that, it's just everything would have to go perfectly for this to happen, which means there would have to not be an organization like G.I. Joe to stop them. Maybe start it where Cobra has no idea that there is a such thing as Joe. They don't know the Joes exist. And then that would be cool because then that's how the battle, this back and forth starts and goes on for years and years and years. But yeah, and I would make Cobra Commander. I wouldn't do origins. We come into this conflict, you would see the origin of, or I'm sorry, the completion of the OG13. Maybe you could focus on Hawk. And maybe in this version, all the 12 were already picked. Or I'm sorry, 11 of the 12 were already picked. And Snake Eyes might have just been picked, but they're still, looking for Hawk. Or trying to convince Hawk to join. And maybe whatever the conflict is that Cobra has, created involves Hawk. He gets somehow stuck in the middle of it, and that also helps push him to join the Joe team and lead it, and then they go and they do what they do, Don't focus it on Snake Eyes, because yeah, he's popular, but he's technically the most boring character in all of the Joe-verse, because not only can he not speak, but his story is just, all these people just keep getting killed. They just keep getting killed. They just keep getting killed. He's bad luck. Past his, and I know a lot of people are going to hate that I'm saying this, but let's be real. You got a guy who's a ninja that does not speak, and who doesn't really, his whole family's dead. He has no friends except for the people on the team. That's it. You can't focus the movie on him, as we've seen already. It's probably the one thing that I'll give them props for with the previous two films. But I think that's the way you have to deal with it, is focus on someone who normally does not get the limelight and show their entrance into this team that already exists. Kind of like what they did in Rise of Cobra, but obviously this story would be a lot better because we're not following what Rise of Cobra did. Cobra, though, we need to have them doing something that's pretty big, especially for the time, and it solidifies what Cobra is all about, We could even take the shtick that they developed now in the recent stories, where Cobra goes into third world countries or countries with a weak economy, builds up the economy, takes out key members, puts in their own people, builds it up to the point of it becoming a power, like a very powerful nation, and eventually everybody on their various boards and, in their various governments is a pawn of Cobra. So before you know it, Cobra has taken over country after country, continent, continent, continent. You know what I'm saying? Maybe this is the first time they finish taking over a continent. Maybe Hawk was vacationing in this continent, on this particular, a country on that continent. Maybe war broke out. He happened to be in the right place at the right time, happened to be the man with the right skills, and he might have put an end to whatever the conflict was in that particular place, but it brings to the attention of whoever it is, whatever brass that starts the G.I. Joe team, it's bringing attention to them that there is an organization doing this shit kind of shadowy, like, I think something simple like that, make it a simplistic but, fantastical action movie plot, and then introduce all these badasses on the good guys team and introduce all the badasses on the bad guys team. You obviously can't go crazy because it's the first encounter of these two, so your teams will be relatively small. If you're going to have 13 good guys, you can have 5 main Cobra command operatives, and then have the different designations of Vipers, have a couple of them because it's early. And then just come up with some vehicles that are really futuristic, especially for the time, and that's what the Joes have to fight. You could even do the whole Dr. Burkhart thing, Do that first issue, or have part of that first issue in this story. I think something that simple, that's it. That's it. And I know this was long-winded, but this is how simple it is. I'm pretty sure all of you Joe collectors, when you played with your Joes, you did your own version of that first issue if you read that first issue. Because I know a lot of people have not read the Joe comics. But if you did, I'm sure you did your own version of Save Dr. Burkhart. I did it multiple times, multiple different ways, you know. Something like that needs to be in there, you know. They need to pay homage to the original, the source material, and there's nothing wrong with that. So that's my story. I'm not going to sit here and write a fan fiction for everybody, but that's generally how I feel that this thing needs to be done. Create a fictional world that parallels our world. Give them their backstories from the books. You know, start the story back in the proper era. Don't try to modernize it. So if the OG13 is supposed to take place in the 80s, then have it take place in the 80s. That's when the first Joe book came out. That's when it takes place. Have everything accurate to the time. Have, you know, like I said, little homages to the source material. All the characters need to look like a superheroic version of whatever the distinction is, because that's what they are. Update their clothes and their armor and stuff once they join the team. When you see them as soldiers in their regular world, whatever, they could be wearing regular military clothes. But once they join the team, then you add the style and make it mimic what we've seen in the figures as much as possible. Amp the action up as high as you can. Lots of physicality, less tech. You know, tech will be there, but for the Joes, it's more physicality, because that's what it takes to be a Joe. You gotta be freaking, you gotta have guts. You gotta be crazy, and, like, you know, you just gotta be physical enough and be the guy ready to just throw everything away, throw all caution to the wind to save whoever you need to save, to meet the objective. Whereas Cobra, on the other hand, the guys who are making all the decisions, they're hidden, they're far away. A merc will be in the field, or several mercs will be in the field, because they were hired to do a job, and they have all the manpower that they need to do this job, and that overconfidence is what will allow the Joes to deal with them. Make the Joes, make it obvious that the Joes, one Joe is worth 10 soldiers, 15 soldiers. You know, make them do the work that a normal squad of soldiers, even a fire team, you know, a fire team of Joes should be doing the work of a battalion. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the difference. And you need to come up with techniques that the Joes would use that are ahead of the times. You know, normal, even the most elite military at the time was not doing this stuff back then. That's what the Joes need to do. And then have fun with it. You know, there can be tons of comedy, but it'd be situational comedy. It wouldn't be slapstick, you know, pants falling down, stuff like that. But it's situational comedy because people's interactions can be funny. Make freaking Snake Eyes a ninja. An actual, like, make him use ninjutsu techniques in the field. Don't make him, like, not a soldier and all ninja. Make him a soldier who uses those techniques, ninjutsu techniques, on the field. That'd be awesome. Don't go overboard with the ninja thing. Just have it be a portion of that world. Focus on characters who normally don't get the limelight. Show Hawk, back when he was young and he was physical and he was all over the place, to show us why he was chosen to lead these guys. You know? It could even be possible that him and Joe Colton were teammates back in the day. You know what I mean? Like, even if you want to add aspects to it, you know, and Colton gets wounded and Hawk survives, and that's why Hawk ends up being the leader, and, you know, Colton kind of disappears into the background, you know, or Colton's believed to be dead, and even Hawk believes that he's dead, and it turns out that he had faked his death because, you know, it worked with infiltrating Cobra or something. You know, there's so many ways you could do this. So anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. These things are so much fun. I'm glad I got an opportunity to do it. Once again, I want to give a quick shout out to my homeboy David T. I don't want to mess up your last name again, from New Zealand. Thank you for watching. Thanks for paying attention. Thanks for watching these videos and geeking out with me, man, because, you know, it would be nice to geek out with all of you guys in real life, but this is the best way we can do it. maybe one day this will get big enough that we can find a way to have a convention where everybody can meet up, you know, or maybe one day we'll just have a mass meetup at a Joe Con or something, you know. But thanks, you know, thanks. I love the fact that we're able to vibe even at that distance. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is the thing that I love, that I think is the best part about the way YouTube was intended to be used. You know, we get to share our opinions, share our ideas and concepts and what we do, and have other people all over the world see what we do and let us know what they think. And if they dig it, they dig it, and we can geek out together, you know? So anyway, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. You guys are all awesome. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Ideas you have, ways to tweak what I said. If you think what I said is 100% on the money, if you think I'm off the money, whatever, you know how this goes. Let me know, and I will catch you guys on the next video. Peace outside.